Hey now, it's House, Revenue Writers Podcast. Welcome back for another lovely edition. Got an exciting one for you today. Not according to me, but according to you. The numbers don't lie. The listeners have voted with their listenership, and it looks like maybe we're onto something with this live streaming thing. There's a lot of interest going on in it lately, and for very good reason. Let's open this with a stat. Did you know that video in an email leads to a 2 to 3 times increase in click-through rate? And that's just video alone. So the reason I open with that stat is because it makes this next one just hit that much harder. So listen to this. Facebook says that live content gets 6 times the engagement of regular content on its platform. Facebook says live content gets 6 times the engagement of regular content on its platform. And the Interactive Advertising Bureau says that 52% consumers turn to social platforms to watch live content. And in 2018, over 80% of the top 500 posts on Facebook were videos. You put all that together, we're seeing that if live streaming has 6 times the amount of engagement, numbers like that are hard to ignore. Restream.io says that by 2025, it will be a $124.57 billion industry. So if that doesn't get you excited, or at least thinking about exploring more about live streaming, I don't know what will, because I will tell you this, that whoever becomes proficient at live streaming and masters it, this is going to be the new wave, the game changer that everybody's been waiting for the upcoming decade and the foreseeable future after that. I can hardly see it dying. Now, there are challenges because as far as business goes and using it for business, only 33% of business-to-business companies use it. So that's a good and a bad thing. That means it's not oversaturated, but also means it's not quite mainstream, meaning we don't really have a read on it. It's going to be hard to get buy-in that way, especially when it could go a lot of different ways where it's not used to its fullest ability. So that's what this episode is going to be about. So we're going to talk more about live streaming. Based on what we know, we can make some intelligent predictions about it. So let's talk about right now. Businesses that are using it right now. What are they using it for? As far as business goes, what they're mainly using it for is Q&As, new product launches, so that in real time they can explain the features that are important to the viewer. They're using it to make offers, live offers. The savvy ones are using it as a way to increase exclusivity, which we all know is a very important psychological trigger of the consumer of today. Everybody typically likes to have what is rare. It's why gold is so popular. They're using it to go to events, whether they're holding them themselves or they're at events in real time answering questions. So what does that say about the viewer then? It really says that they are craving interaction, real life interaction. They want somebody that is personal. They want businesses that are personal. And it makes sense with the declining attention span of today that to keep them busy, they don't want to just sit there and watch idly. They want to be a part of whatever is going on. Here's another interesting tidbit for you, is that Instagram, which is typically seen as more of a teeny bopper type of platform, even though it's owned by Facebook. Over 500 million daily users on there. The thing about Instagram is that businesses, 80% of consumers are following a business or a brand on there. Those are some great numbers, but they're also going on there as a underutilized tactic and participating in Instagram Live as well. Now, the great thing about Instagram Live is that it's not oversaturated at the moment, but also it's different from YouTube in the sense that YouTube, you're required to have 1,000 subscribers to be able to go live with a mobile phone. This is not the case with Instagram. And if we know that 33% of B2B companies are on Instagram, that's a hugely underutilized channel to participate in live streaming. So now this is the what, and this is why I wanted to make this episode, is because now that we've established the what, we know why it's important. Here is where it could potentially go wrong. And actually, I would even go as, you know what, forget it. Let me be bold and say this is where it will go wrong for a lot of people. If there's anything that we can learn from articles, blogs, the SEO experiment, I came up with a list of 7 different things that will sink businesses that try to get into live streaming and then will underperform. It will happen. That's just the numbers. But by you knowing this right now, you will be able to spot these signs and prevent tragedy before it even happens. Why even get there, right? Being informed is half the battle. If I was to leave the podcast right here, we have now commoditized live streaming because it's easy to get excited and say, that's what we're doing. That's it. But again, it's the quality and what goes into that content. That's why people got so trigger happy with SEO. They said, that's all we got to do. We just got to invest in SEO. A mountain glacier stream of leads just flowing in. And then we find out with hindsight that 82% of companies didn't even trust their agency that they hired. And why is that? Who's at fault here? Is it an underperformance from the agency hired, or is it the buyer? Of course, the answer is always going to lie somewhere in the middle, but gray areas aren't fun. So let me put the onus on the buyer right now, because we're all about accountability these days, aren't we? Yeah, there's nothing wrong with some hard truths. It's good for us, builds character. So here it is. What's the most tempting thing that every CEO is going to want you to do when they start investing in a live streaming program for their company? Sell, 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 right? Go on there. I don't even want to publish it. I will discontinue funding if you do not mention our name and have 5 calls to action within the first 5 minutes. And make sure that our logo can be seen. I'm sorry, CEOs. I know you're not all like that, but you got to admit that was a big theme of the 10s. And that is why a lot of blogs came out flat, fluffy, unshareable, unlinkable. And then the natural reaction for that was they keep seeing it in Forbes pop up. Blogs, killing it. You got to invest in your blog. Get a blog. Talk to bloggers, influencer marketing, blog. SEO results. But we see that not all blogs are created equally, much like all live streaming platforms will not be created equally either. So the first thing, if you're going to learn from any sample size that we have in a somewhat infant stage still of digital marketing, we only really have since the early 90s at best to compare it to. But do not just go on and start selling your business immediately. You will repel the viewers that way. Much like blogs, it has to be value-packed, entertaining. Got to build the trust of the audience over time. This sounds like a platitude, a cliche almost, but still, for some reason, it is still not accepted vernacular in today's day and age, and we are here in 2020. Don't say I didn't tell you if you heard this, though. So if you didn't catch that, that's number 1, being too self-promotional. Here's where it's going to get a little bit more non-obvious, but I wanted to start with that one because it's the most important. Don't be self-promotional. CEOs, stop it. Stop grabbing your team by the ear when they're not pulling in revenue for the first week. The second one, now, while this might also sound obvious, is not being prepared for live, not properly planning or creating a strategy. Let's take that a step further here. What does that really mean? Well, it's dynamic. We've seen what happens with video, written articles, even landing pages when it's not properly thought out. And this usually happens because someone gets hired on price, or because they're simply were spread too thin and didn't put the amount of time that it really takes to see the results. People are not settling for flat content anymore. The attention spans are way too low. The expectations are higher. There's no room to do this anymore. What you're going to have to plan for is all the things that would come up like it would on TV. It's live. There are going to be times, like a stand-up comedian finds out, where a joke they thought would hit hard completely falls on deaf ears and there's crickets. Now, can someone in your organization, whoever is on live streaming, have the grace and the poise to move past that, ignore it? Or is it going to set the tone for the rest of the video where the energy is just down, the engagement rate falls, and then it's chalked up to not working? Plan for those situations. Have something in the back pocket to get them re-engaged. So whatever your definition of being prepared is, times that by 10. If it's done on the first edit, it's wrong. Go through a wash cycle of 5 if you have to. Edit. Get it to where it is absolutely crystal clear what your value proposition is. And now you could say, well, if you over prepare, you're going to sound stilted, wooden. Agreed. But it's also preparing for the things that you can't prepare for. That's a mind state. It's what to do if X and X happens, even if it's the most unusual thing that happens. A bunch of trolls flood your channel. What are you going to do? How are you going to react to it? What if your jokes don't land? What if nobody shows up? What if everybody leaves all at once? What if you're met with a barrage of disagreement on something that you thought was unanimously agreed upon that your audience would love? How are you going to adapt to those situations? What is the best practice? How are you going to win them back? Those are all the questions that you need to go through, and that is going to require undistracted thinking, no winging it. It's not going to be good enough. It has to be well dialed in and agreed upon by your organization and your team. And when it doesn't go as well as planned, do not fold, go back and optimize. Find out where it went wrong, come up with a new game plan next time. That's a free learning lesson. That's live audience feedback. It's amazing. To get that instantaneous feedback directly to your brand, companies pay millions of dollars to these big firms for the research and data for something very similar. Take advantage of that. The consumer, the viewer will tell you what they like and don't like. Invaluable. Now, with that being said, as we touched on a little bit, number 3 is going to be being too scripted, being too safe, sounding robotic. If it sounds like you're reading off a teleprompter, even though there's somebody in the comment section asking you questions directly, and you automatically go into robot mode because that's what your brand guidelines say, you will get eaten alive. Mark my words on that. Very few can pull off the acting required to pull off that really overly scripted style. And if it sounds canned, that could be detrimental to the rest of the series that you have. So in that sense, when we say scripted, a general ballpark, not word for word. Just have the underlying message, uhs are okay. It's conversational. That's what they expect. That's something that you can actually get away with that you can't get away with in podcasting or videos. So it will be a turnoff if you sound like a news anchor. Loosen up on the brand guidelines a little bit. I know that's an unpopular opinion to say. Things have to fall in under your core message. But how much does your core message mean in live if people don't like it? Number 4, here's a huge one right here. Falling for the live streaming expert or consultant. Okay, here's the thing. It's going to be a hard truth because it's tempting when you have a big budget to go out and find the best of the best, right? The problem is you're going to run into a lot of opportunists right now. Because it's so hot, everybody is going to automatically throw on their hat, say that they've been doing this forever. They'll maybe do 2 or 3 webinars. They will have all the industry jargon, but not really know the full details of it. I know that the consultants and the charlatans are going to hate me for this one, but that's okay. Opportunists like that hop on the trends, well, they end up ruining it for everybody. I can't tell you how many times I have seen this. I don't think there's a stat on people that hop on trends, so forgive me if it's anecdotal in this sense, but I can't tell you how many times, and you've probably seen them on your LinkedIn feed, of somebody that 1 minute was a cryptocurrency expert, then they were a blockchain expert, then they were an AI expert, then they were a YouTube guru. You can probably bet that they will also now, all of a sudden, become a live streaming guru. Do not fall for it. Okay, it is still so early in its infancy as it applies to business that anybody that says that they have a full entire grasp on it, they're full of it, it will be a waste of your time and money. It only benefits their pockets. We are still finding this out. So what do you do instead? Well, there's a couple options. You find the buy-in to be experimental, or you cold approach somebody that you see is having success. Maybe they're not even a live streaming expert, but they use it successfully and soliciting their help, paid or unpaid, depending on how gracious they are and how valuable their time is. That is an underrated hidden gem right there, but I'm telling you right now, it'll save you so much time and money. See, here's the other thing about that too, is that when you jump on the trends, how trendy are podcasts? As a podcaster, I'm saying this. Well, there's a different reason that this is a B2B channel. Very few outlets to reach you. Very few can show what you know like a podcast. But here's the thing. When everybody, even companies that are unrelated, even companies really have no purpose of being on a podcast other than to create content, but it's seemingly unrelated to their business, as we've seen many companies do. Some have done it very well Admittedly, BMW did a great job of doing this, but it's also been a disaster for many because they just had to have a podcast. And some actually did produce high quality content, but the attribution and the link is not there to the business. You can say it's good for brand awareness, but that's arguable if it's not moving the needle on anything. How much will the listener remember? But as we see with podcasts, look at the state of where it is today. Look at all the stats that talked about this explosive growth. It still is growing, don't get me wrong. But we're starting to see the full effects of what happens when so many people oversaturate channels. What happened is now the platforms, Spotify, Apple, YouTube to some degree, SoundCloud, all of these different channels, what they've done is they've had to play it safe. They haven't really had a choice because pod fade is a thing. That's when someone creates 8 episodes and then they fall off the face of the map. And that is the exact number is 8. That's typically when a podcast will stop putting out episodes due to lack of engagement, perhaps the work, they're not seeing the benefit of it. And that is more often the case than not. So with the platforms now having to play it safe, typically present to the listener, because it's safe, the same old podcast. It makes discoverability very hard. And what happens there is that companies that may very well have excellent podcast material don't really get found or discovered. They're not making it on the front page. They're not trending because streaming platforms have lost confidence in new podcasting content for very good reasons. So that hurts the entire industry. And what ends up happening is excellent content creators may get discouraged, stop putting out episodes, and then we're left with the same thing that we've been seeing for the past 3 years. I know that iTunes hardly looks any different from what I saw 3 years ago. I still see the same cover art in some cases. Looking at you, Anchor.fm. Point is, I can very well see this happening with live streaming, and that's up to you right now at this stage to make that leap into it now, or come up with exceptional quality to make sure that this doesn't happen to you where it's just a waste of time for everybody. When something gets oversaturated, it ends up just falling away right in the wayside, sticking in with everything else. And just so we're clear, creating safe content will not replace the safer content that has been proven. Might take a little bit of risk taking if you're late to the party, and there's nothing wrong with being late to the party, especially if you don't have a clear message or direction that you want to go in. Better to stand pat until you have that crystal clear idea that is enough to fuel you for at least a few years. Number 5, buying off price. Come on. Hate that I even have to say this. We have to learn the lesson on this one. Do I sound biased a little bit against this? Not really. No, I'm not an agency. I'm one person here. But even I can see that it's a bad idea to try to value shop and turn a service, something that requires exceptional creativity and technicality, into something like going to a vending machine, popping a quarter in and expecting a soda can to pop out. That is not marketing services. You cannot escape the pain that comes with either having to put up a reasonable amount of money to get the quality needed to even make it worth it. You will not escape. It's going to hurt. It has to. That's life. It's the same thing as diet pills and ab belts. Because if ab belts and diet pills were all it took, nobody would go to the gym. There'd be no such thing as personal trainers. Do not fall for the diet pill phenomena. It's the same thing with live streaming. Do not try to find a live streaming service, strategy, live streaming scriptwriter for cheap. You will get cheap results. And at that point, it's not live streaming, because live streaming is not a person. It is not something that can be blamed. It is the user. It is up to the tool user on how it performs. It is just a vehicle. Can't stress this enough. It is not a commodity. All live streaming is not created equal. Treat it more like a house or a car. If I said to you, here's $150,000, go buy me a house, and you show me something that has a high crime area 5 states away from somewhere I don't want to live, and I blame you, who's to blame at that point? Should I have been a little bit more clear? Should I have maybe said, okay, here's $500,000, stick to the West Coast, I want something in a school district. You see my point here? Do not commoditize it. Give it a little bit more respect than that, especially if you're going to be handing over checks that are about the same as a car or a house. This is to my corporate crowd. Keep in mind, it's better to overpay for a service and make a return on your money than it is to undervalue and underpay for a service and get nothing back at all. Because at least in the overpay example, you at least have decent quality of content and there's not time wasted. And no matter how much I preach this message, it will happen, and you will see what I mean. Once it grows a little bit more, you will see what a bad stream looks like. You'll have some comparison. Don't be one of them. Number 6 is pulling the plug too early. Now, if you expect immediate results out of something that is still so new, where all the kinks haven't been worked out, gamers seem to be the only one that have figured it out so far. That's another problem, is that pulling away that market share to where there's more business focus and applying it and getting as savvy as they've become with live streaming. That is another challenge. Everything in all the platforms like Twitch, they're so gamer-centric that knowing the numbers of how many people are watching doesn't really do us a whole lot of good. It tells us an idea, but it's still not really clear about how much it's actually affecting the live streaming market. We don't know what that means. If there's 100 million people on a platform and 60 million are there to watch games, the other 20 million for entertainment, that unknown area, we don't know who it's for. So it will take time. It will take time like any other channel to build a natural following. I guess the exception to the rule would be if you have a contract saying that Elon Musk is going to take LSD on your channel at Thursday, 3 o'clock Eastern, then yeah, okay, maybe you will have a big boom immediately. But how likely is that scenario? Not really. If you plan to do it organically, especially if you're on a cost-focused budget, it's going to take time. There is going to be growing pains. If you're a CEO listening to this or a VP of marketing, it is up to you at that point to create KPIs that are achievable, are realistic, and are not built on your feeling of impatience. You're better off not doing anything at that point. Best example that I could give for this is if you were an airline pilot and I said, you need to get us to China from California in 2 hours or else. How frustrated would you be at that point? Not only would you be frustrated, but you'd be trying to tell the person, this isn't possible. Well, you said you're the best pilot in the world. Well, I am, but doesn't mean that I can bend physics. It's the same thing. These are the laws of nature here. It takes time. You cannot build trust overnight. You're not going to be able to work through every single mistake up front. There's going to be tons that are made. That's up to you to show some leadership, show some buy-in to your team, and they will reward you. They will. We've seen this time and time again with younger generation. If you give them a little bit more responsibility, raise the bar for them, a lot of them will go out of their way to meet it. We cannot come down on the youth of this country and say that they don't know what being patient is like. They want everything handed to them today and then not show it in actions by not showing them what delayed gratification looks like. That would be a lot like firing a personal trainer after 2 months because you don't have Hollywood six-pack abs, blaming the trainer and saying they don't know what they're doing. No, it's just biology. Don't get me wrong. Feelings are important, but reality is more important. Stick to that, and that's how you win. The absolute worst thing you could do when you're holding your team accountable to a live streaming program with something so new is deflating their confidence and motivation, because at that point there is nothing worse than a zombie on autopilot running something that is supposed to be creative and built on enthusiasm in nature. Again, it goes back to biology because there is something called the feedback loop. And when you assign a negative feedback loop when they're doing their absolute best with what they're given, if they're not, of course, then at that point, it is reasonable to come down on them. I'm not saying to just bend the bar for them. At the end of the day, they have to produce, but it's up to you and your team to come up with an agreement on what realistic KPIs are or what they can control. Because if you don't do that up front and you just expect, well, it's been a month and a half, I'm getting antsy, based on a gut feeling, it's not going to go well. And at that point, I would not feel sorry for you. And number 7 is an unpopular opinion, but hopefully this ages well. And this is one of those things that will say I was ahead of my time. It's typically how unpopular opinions tend to play out, but here it is. I'm going to say that the company, stay out of the politics. Do not cave and bend in and let good employees go because of some stupid Twitter fight. Some outrage that happened on live streaming where it was not really a direct, whoever was on the live stream may have said something that people took wrong and it wasn't even close to being intended that way. Do not cave in to this outrage culture. Very, very loud vocal minority bully you around and hurt your bottom line because of a short-term stimulus-based reaction to something that was questionable, line teetering at best. Talk to the person that did it. Move on, okay? There's no reason to be letting people control the way that you run your business and take away some of your talent and get people too gun-shy to say anything. Because at that point, you might as well just hand over your shares to that group then. What's the point of even having any creative control? Just give it to them. Look, some things can be misinterpreted. I mean, there shouldn't be an underlying message that you're trying to get out politically anyways. This is business. It's supposed to be focused on the consumer and solving a need. I'm sure that's why your business was started, whether you're the founder or you're the CEO. Do not cave into that. We've seen what happened to companies that did. You find out those people that are calling the shots like that, bullying your employees into silence, you find out that they don't really have the wallet that they said they did. So that last one was a little bit of what could go wrong, a little bit of unpopular opinion, but that should tell you the biggest reasons that your live streaming will be a disaster. It's important to know that up front, in my opinion. Again, this is just my opinion on this specific strategy. You're free to do whatever you please. But I have typically found when you lead with what can go wrong and build your strategy around making sure that you don't do those things, then you start worrying about what you can do to go on the offense. When you don't have to worry about these little potholes and slipping in them, it's amazing what happens when you can just focus on the offense part of it, when it's already built into your strategy to be mistake-proof or as mistake-free as possible. Unnecessary mistakes. There's some good ones that you'll learn from. Perhaps your show was going on too long. Maybe it was too short. The audience will let you know. That's the great thing about live streaming. It's right then and there. They'll tell you what they like and don't like. You don't have to wait for some overpriced research firm to hand you a spreadsheet at the end of the year. You get it right there from the people that you need to tell you. We're going to continue on with this series. I have quite a bit more of information, but hopefully that gives you a look at where we're headed and where we're right now, where there's deficiencies. It is exciting. There's plenty of room for new innovative ideas. In fact, I'm working on some my own self, playing around with some formats that I haven't seen really used. But as a digital marketing professional, if that's you, or a startup founder, incredibly exciting times. And again, the bar has risen. So live streaming, how that's going to affect the industry itself, there'll be very few that will be good at it. I promise you that. It is a whole new level of intensity right there on the spot. A lot of pressure, more eyeballs. Who can handle it? That's going to be the question. Who has the best message? Who has the best format? Who is being the most human? This is House, and I will see you on the next episode of the Revenue Writers Podcast, where we are going to be talking about the offense. What are some creative ways that aren't being done right now in live streaming? That's what we're going to talk about. Stay tuned. Be sure to follow, subscribe. We also have the YouTube channel for more premier audio content for the savvy, modern digital marketer and B2B startup founder of today. We'll see you next time. Ciao.